This video was made possible by Hover. Buy your domain for 10% off at hover.com/HAI. So, you know that thing in the US nowadays where every few months interest rates go up, then the stock market goes like this, mass panic ensues, but it's actually a good thing because it signals the economy is strong and it gives a way to fight economic slowdowns in the future, but interest rates haven't been raised enough and there are no mechanisms to fight an upcoming recession and we're all gonna die and panic should start now and you should stock up on gold bars and bullets and all the money is going bye-bye? Yeah, well, setting that interest rate is the responsibility of the US Federal Reserve. The Fed is important not only because it manages interest rates, but also because it manages this, the US dollar. The US dollar is important not only because it's what's used in the world's largest America, but also because a number of other countries use it with varying levels of officiality. Some countries like Ecuador and El Salvador and East Timor use it as their actual official currency, while others like Barbados, the Bahamas, and Belize have currencies tied in value to the US dollar and accept both currencies widely, while almost the whole world uses the dollar for business purposes thanks to its stability. So don't worry, the other 95.7% of the world, you're getting mentioned this episode. Exactly that one time. As a country that has existed for a medium amount of time, there have been many iterations of US banknotes, and you'll notice that even the old ones say something along the lines of, "This note is a legal tender at its face value for all debts, public or private." There's no expiration date on this note, which means that, despite it being printed in 1880, it is still a fully legal $5 bill that you could use anywhere you wanted. Of course, its collector value is much greater than its face value, but still, you could rock up to a 7-Eleven and buy some Mountain Dew with it. Now, this occasionally leads to issues because your average 7-Eleven clerk probably doesn't know what all the hundreds of different iterations of US banknotes look like. This is all unlike countries like the UK. Oh, wait, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to mention the rest of the world again. This is unlike in the UK, where this paper 10-pound banknote, printed as recently as 2016, is no longer accepted in stores. You can go to the Bank of England, Scotland, Ireland, or another of the banks that issue notes to exchange your paper 10 pounds for the new polymer 10 pounds, but unfortunately, you can't pay for your cheeky Nandos with the lads using them. So that brings us to the big boys of American banknotes. As any street-based entrepreneur knows, the only banknotes currently being printed in the US are the $1, $2, $5, $10, $20, $50, and $100 bills. If you get a $100 trillion note, you might have performed a little too much product testing, walked too far, and ended up in Zimbabwe. Of course, in the days before Venmo, PayPal, and credit cards, banknotes were more important as they were the primary means of paying for things. Even when buying something pricey like real estate, banknotes were often still used, and the US didn't want every large transaction playing out like a Mr. Beast video with people rocking up with wheelbarrows of $100 bills. Therefore, the US issued at different times $500, $1,000, $5,000, and $10,000 banknotes. Those were and still are fully legal and real banknotes with which you could pay for anything you wanted. Except for happiness. It's worth noting that, due to inflation, the earliest $10,000 note, issued in 1863, was at the time worth the equivalent of $200,000 today. In your pocket, you could carry enough value to buy a house, a few cars, or a few dozen textbooks. The other major purpose for these large denomination banknotes was for transfers between banks. Wire transfers have existed since the 1870s over telegraph, but they weren't yet secure and reliable. Therefore, banks still often settled up debts between each other by sending over cash, and these large bills made it quite a bit easier. Of course, there are 12 huge banks across the US which essentially act as the government's bank, the Federal Reserve Banks. These biggest of the big boys needed some big boy bills to transfer money between them, and so they printed this, the $100,000 bill. These bills were officially gold certificates. They represented $100,000 in gold that the Fed banks had, and when they were printed in 1934, they had the equivalent value to $1.9 million today. About 42,000 $100,000 notes were printed, and they were used for their money transfer purpose up until the 60s when they were withdrawn. Unlike normal notes, where the withdrawal process works by destroying any notes received by banks and therefore notes can stay in circulation for decades or centuries, these $100,000 notes were able to be repossessed by the government rather easily since they were exclusively in the possession of the government. While most were destroyed, a few specimens remain in museums and at Fed banks, and since the government has all their surviving notes, it's illegal for a person to possess this note since the only way to get it would be through theft. Of course, we at Half as Interesting are 99.9% anti-illegalness, so if you have a fully legal $10,000 bill, there are a few uses I can suggest. Shredder calibrating, bougie kindling, Hoover stuffing, or buying 770.com domains from Hover. If you have a name for yourself, a current company, a possible future company, or anything, you should buy the domain for it as soon as possible so someone else can't. Hover makes this super simple and inexpensive. They have best-in-class customer service, the ability to connect to almost any website builder in a few clicks, and the option of setting up a super professional, super cool custom email with your domain. Best of all, you can get 10% off and help support the show by going to hover.com/HAI.